It's 9 a.m. and I'd like to call to the order of the meeting of the Governmental Affairs and Public Information Committee of Friday, April 26, 2024. Before we begin, please note this meeting is recorded. Welcome to my colleagues and everyone joining us here in person, as well as those listening on the phone. If you would like to provide public comment at today's meeting, if you have not done so already, please let Thomas in the back of the room know, or Justine for the call-in line. And which items you'd like to speak on. Madam Secretary, please begin calling the roll.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Director Dorsey?
Present.
Garbarino? Hill?
Here.
Rabbit?
Here.
Verdoni?
Here.
Safai? That's it. Vice Chair Giudice?
Here.
Chair Snyder?
Here.
And President Cochran?
Here.
All right, you have a quorum, but you also are a committee of the whole. In the room, we also have directors Engardio, Grosball, Fernandez, Maston, Parr, Terrio, and Deere. So you have a bunch of people in the room.
Good. All right, thank you. So we'll begin with agenda item number 3, which is the state update to the district's legislative advocates, Platinum Advisors. Our Sacramento legislative partner, Steve Wallach, is here to present information report. Steve, welcome.
Thanks.
Good to see you again.
Good to see everybody again. So it's nice to come down here, particularly when the weather's nice like this. Steve Wallach of Platinum Advisors, here to give an update on what's happening in Sacramento and what may be happening in the future. So right now, I admit there's the legislative process and the budget process is the main focus right now. With the budget, in January and earlier, there's a lot of, concerns about the size of the deficit, debates over the size of the deficit. And so we're mainly waiting right now until the May revise comes out in mid-May, May 15th, usually about when the governor releases that. They really get a determination of how big the problem is. Early on, I think the governor pegged the deficit about $36 billion in January. LAO kind of considered it more $70 billion. And honestly, as you adjust how those calculations were made, they're about the same. If you back out what the changes the governor made with his budget and compare that to LAO's estimate, which is a constant, they're not that far off. Over the past few months, there's revenues did drop in December and January below what they estimate, so we're already at a bigger deficit than we were. However, February and March were a little above what was expected by maybe $1 billion. So not enough to wipe anything out, but at least a promising sign. And April revenues right now are tracking to be close to what they estimate, maybe a little bit below that amount. So given that, we do expect the governors may revise to probably readjust and increase the deficit size that they need to address, not to the scale of what the LAO has projected, but maybe a little more than what the governor projected. So it's not going to be necessarily good news, but not horrible news as it could have been. The legislature did take some what they call early action items earlier last month. So that reduced the size of the deficit by about $17 billion, which is basically what they did was they adopted early several of the proposals that were in the January budget revised. As far as like transportation, they do retain their commitment to public transit, the $5 billion that was in the budget from last year. They do spread it out over another year, so that what they call the TIRSIP formula allocation, instead of $2 billion going out next fiscal year, they plan on only doing $1 billion and then another $1 billion the following fiscal year. This is the money that goes to the regions that can be used for capital and transit operations to kind of address that fiscal cliff. So that's a promising sign. Hopefully, we won't see any additional cuts. I mean, if the deficit is supposed to balloon up even more larger, then that would create some concerns for some pressure to take action in the transportation area. But right now, I think we are okay and proposing and pursuing and supporting the status quo on that. As far as like the bridge district, on one of our main items that we're advocating for is like additional funding for the seismic retrofit of the final phase of the bridge. So we've had several meetings with leadership, with Senator McGuire, Senator Wiener, the delegation on both houses. And we're also meeting with the subcommittee chairs as well to try and generate support and working on the governor's office to try and secure their support for a proposal that would provide that funding over a period of 5 years from within existing resources. So we wouldn't be adding to the deficit. We wouldn't be taking general fund money, but we're using revenue that's currently part of D1 that's planned for Caltrans in their shop program and allowing that to be used for local bridge program. It would not only benefit us the way we have it written, it would benefit other areas of the state for their local bridge projects as well. So right now, it's not over until it's over. So we have, I think, the end of session before that can be worked out. As you know, it's been common practice for budget trailer bills to be not just adopted in June, but for the rest of the session until the very last day of session. So we are that's our highest priority right now, is to try and secure that funding. On the legislative front, there is always, every year, thousands of bills that we track. I think I just gave you a sampling of some of the ones we're tracking on behalf of the district and some that we're advocating for. Ones I wanted to just kind of highlight right now is AB 817. This is a Brown Act bill that will allow for subsidiary and advisory bodies to meet remotely. It was introduced last year. It was passed out of the Assembly in January, so it's moving forward. It hasn't been heard in the Senate yet, but that's normal because they usually address their House of Origin bills first before they go into the second House bills later. I mean, probably June timeframe on that one. The other bills is an interesting bill we're watching is AB 1837. I'll get into the bigger picture of that with SB 1031, but this is a bill by Assemblywoman Pappen that would basically codify the regional network management council that's currently in place with MTC that has the bridge GM as well as all the other large transit operator GMs and a few other smaller operators that are consulting with MTC on the whole Blue Ribbon implementation process. This bill will just put it in statute. It doesn't really tie it to anything yet within the with MTC as far as like consultation process, but it's going to be something to use as leverage as those negotiations heat up. The other bill we are co-sponsoring is AB 2061. This was attempted last year. This is a bill that would exempt from the state portion of the sales tax the purchase of zero-emission ferries. This would be consistent with the current practice of exempting zero-emission buses, transit buses from the state portion of the sales tax. This bill is currently in Rev and Tax Committee. They have their own suspense file, so they should be taking that up in the next couple of weeks. Hopefully move forward. Given the deficit, it makes it a little more difficult to get these things through, but we will continue to work with WETA and the author on moving that forward. And then another bill I just wanted to highlight, AB 2024 is the one we're watching. This is on assault of transit employees. This was originally going to be sponsored by the Transit Association and ATU. The bill is basically dead for this year because they couldn't come to agreement with the author on some of the provisions in the bill that they wanted, that they originally proposed. The way it is drafted now, it basically expands the existing penalties for assault of a bus driver to all basically transit employees, whether that's on a bus or in a bus station or something like that, or a transit station. So there's other provisions they wanted to add to it regarding prohibition orders that they couldn't reach agreement on. So they have decided to drop the bill for this year and probably again next year. And then I just want to point out SB 960. I think there's an error on the chart. I think I have it marked as a support. It should be watch. That was my mistake in not catching that makes other people support it. This is a bill by Senator Weiner that would put in statute require Caltrans to address complete street issues, bike, pedestrian, and transit, and also as well as develop transit priority policies within Caltrans when they are doing work on the shop or other state highways that are basically main streets, which are a lot of them around here and within the Bay Area. So we'll continue to watch that. And then the biggest bill that's probably taking up the most time right now is SB 1031. Senator Weiner and Senator Wahab are the joint authors of this bill. This is the bill that would allow MTC to place on the regional ballot a measure to generate tax revenues for transit operations as well as some capital improvements. The bill was heard this past week in both policy committees, the Senate Transportation Committee and the Senate Revenue Tax Committee, and now moves to Senate Appropriations. This is a moving target as far as like the content. It's very complex and has a lot of different things in there that some people may not feel are consistent, but they're working it out. And hopefully by the end, if this bill gets through this year, we'll all be on the same page within the region and have a proposal we can move forward with and support on the ballot. There are additional amendments that were kind of agreed to that aren't in print. We don't expect to see them in print until it actually comes off the suspense file in appropriations that would make changes such as sunset the authority to put something on the ballot in 2040. Any tax that's imposed, it would have to sunset within 30 years. I think those stuff, they're clarifying, DC could condition the receipt of STA funds, but couldn't condition the receipt of other revenue sources for transit operators, and a whole host of I would say more technical issues. And then the other provisions in the bill are a consolidation study, which has gotten, maybe it's the version there is maybe better, but still very lengthy and complex. It still directs the Cal STA, the transportation agency, to contract with an entity to do a study on consolidating operators as well as functions of operators within the region. And they would have to do a report to the legislature on, kind of what their recommendations would be. There's some inconsistencies in the bill right now in that it's the tax revenue that would be passed, the regional measure that would be used for that study. But right now the study is due before that tax measure will be on the ballot. So there's things like that that still need to be resolved. This is going to be time consuming. Now, with the outlook of 1031, I mean, it's pretty contentious, particularly at the regional level right now on different entities, different operators and organizations that some support, some oppose. The bill may not make it through this year, but it doesn't have to make it through this year. So they could come back next year, use this process to kind of flesh things out to see where everyone's at, and then come up with a proposal next year that would everyone could support. So, but I don't think that's the intent right now. I think the intent is to get something done this year. I think Senator Wiener's office kind of mentioned they want to try and have the bill as fleshed out as possible before it gets to the Senate floor, before it goes over to the Assembly, who will have their own ideas of what should and should not be in there. So that's a lot of information. I don't know if there's some questions about different things that either I mentioned or didn't mention.
So you guys ready to go to questions?
That was Pat. Thank you very, very much, and for the handout, the synopsis as well. I think I've answered my own question on AB 2061. I wasn't really sure what it was exempting. If it was exempting toxic control measures or it's simply sales tax. Is that correct?
Just simply sales tax, the state portion of sales tax. So it doesn't apply to local Bradley burns or local sales tax.
Okay.
And then there's also some state sales tax increments that are for purposes that it also doesn't exempt. So it's about like a 5% reduction.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
On the first page, you referenced using that 17.3 million plus existing reserves, wiping almost 2/3 of it out. What is that? What's the perception of the current amount of reserves that they're using? I'm just curious.
As far as I can remember the exact amount of reserves they proposed, but I think it's close to about 13, 14 billion. It would still leave about a similar amount in the reserves.
Okay. And I had one other question on one matter you didn't discuss, which is, it looks like it's active, but it's with SB 537 allowing teleconferencing of certain meetings. Sounds like that's not going anywhere if it's inactive.
Oh, 837, is that the Becker bill?
Yeah, Becker.
Yeah, that's a 2-year bill. So it will be, hopefully, it's on the Assembly floor inactive. This is regarding kind of making changes to the Brown Act for remote participation. I mean, quite honestly, I think the way that bill's drafted, it is very complex. It's almost easier to use the existing law to have remote participation than that one. But it's one they're still trying to work out to address. It was probably held on the Assembly floor last year because they probably weren't going to get it signed into law. Concerned, so they'll hopefully work it. I assume he's going to continue to try and address some of those concerns in the bill before moving forward. There's other bills on Brown Act that are introduced this year. Most of them are just like tweaks to the Brown Act. One was clarifying the existing, was AB 2449 that allows for remote participation if certain conditions are met. This would, it also kind of had a confusing process where how many meetings you can participate remotely, depending on the size and how often the board meets. Kind of clarify a day, if you meet twice a month, you can the number of times you can remotely participate a year is like 5 times or something like that. I can't remember exact numbers, but there's others out there, but it's gotten so complex.
Yeah, thank you.
Other directors have any questions? I had one on AB 1837. It would require like a council of directors. Would our esteemed manager be on? that council.
The
The one that would record the
If
general
happened.
managers.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
What we do now is
Yes.
have to continue doing forever, whether it makes sense or not 20 years from now.
It does, I think that's let's promulgate in there, yes, in statute.
Since it makes sense or not, I am the regional network manager chair of that committee at MTC. It used to be called operations, and they switched it over to regional network management to do the transit transformation. However, that is going to be finally defined is still a work in progress, as is obviously 1031. I was in Sacramento last week, and I had meetings with about 5 different senators on 1031, talking about the different pieces that are at play. And I know our general manager is also part of those conversations, so it should be interesting. I think within the Bay Area, I know Santa Clara has taken kind of a strong opinions. They have 3 transportation measures themselves, including one that gets BART into downtown, that they fear this measure at probably the $2 billion mark in order to satisfy all the concerns would be the equivalent of a 3/4 cent sales tax if it goes in that direction. They haven't defined what the revenue would be. It could be a sales tax, a regional payroll tax, parcel tax, or a regional vehicle surcharge, but that couldn't happen for some years out. And I think the same is said for, I know even in my county, everyone's kind of worried about what the individual sales tax measures that are in place, the impact. And the reality is that goes to how California has not historically funded transit. And so all the regions have had to come up and do their own tax measures, whether it's through a portion of sales tax or whatever it may be. And now the state is deciding, well, maybe we should be in charge of that, and we should tell you what to do. And I think there's a lot of pushback because of that. So we'll see how it all ends up. But it's been pretty interesting. That now, since we talked about seismic too, I also was elected to the chairmanship of the State Seismic Safety Commission last week, for whatever that gets me.
It gets you another meeting.
That's remind you of the amendments that they plan on making the bill is like, if they do impose a sales tax, it can't be more than ½ cent. And then that's one. The other thing is the goal of the legislation is to generate up to $1.5 billion annually. So how they get there, ½ cent regionally is about $1 billion, 1.2 billion.
And I do, if I may, the big question, I think, in all 9 counties is quote unquote return to source, however that gets defined. And when you have a smaller number of, basically BART, this district perhaps, Caltrain as those entities of the 27 that face a transit fiscal cliff, return to source becomes more difficult to achieve because you're trying to make sure that you concentrate on those that are in the worst financial condition. But there are, besides just the numerical return to source criteria within the bill, there are other ways there's a return to source, which some of our counties may receive, especially if you're a BART county, perhaps. So it becomes interesting discussions.
Yeah.
If I may, on Senate Bill 1031, there's a lot in there that has been said, so it's quite challenging. We have not taken a position on it because it's changing every other day. But the board did adopt a broad legislative platform that gives us guardrails to advocate within. And so with respect to how it first landed, when it was introduced, it raised a couple of concerns vis-a-vis this board's ability to operate its business. The bill had maintenance of effort language that would require this entity to maintain transit funding even if revenues declined, or to reduce bridge staff who protect and maintain the bridge if we wanted to reduce transit staff. And so it got into your authority, your mission, your enabling legislation in unintended ways. There's been some attempts to fix that. The amendment that was introduced, I guess the 16th, partially addresses that, but it still has some problematic issues. So we don't want something that tells you how to manage the bridge as part of a transit bill. It's not the intent of the author to do that. It's just, you're writing legislation that applies to 27 agencies. We also don't want any unfunded mandates. So if they were to impose a regional pass that's $10, and they want to give us, a dollar for every time someone rides a ferry boat. Well, before the pandemic, fares covered over half of our ferry budget. And so if they want to have a regional pass product, they need to guarantee the revenues. Otherwise, we won't be able to afford the ferry service. And so we want to make sure that, any initiatives on regional passes, which we support wholeheartedly, has some sort of backstop or doesn't, cause harm to an agency that relies on fares. Because some agencies, fares are a small percentage of the budget. Some agencies, their fares are 8% of their transit budget, and they probably spend 8% collecting the fares. But for us, fares are a significant portion of our revenues. Before the pandemic, tolls were our largest source of funding for our transit system. Fares were our second largest source. So we want to ensure that the bill doesn't do harm to the organization as they navigate this. Then the return to source is quite problematic. And so the bill has a lot of people that are taking positions of oppose unless amended. And so they'll have to try to pick those folks off in the coming weeks to see how it is. Some of them are pretty significant players in Sacramento. So the bill does have a rather tough road ahead of it. But from our perspective, we support regional efforts. We support a consideration of additional revenues for transit in the region. With respect to the consolidation facet of it, we're not opposed to the legislature studying consolidation. It would be foolish from a public policy perspective to talk about consolidating agencies without studying it from a business perspective of, does it make sense? Will it save money or cost money? And so any ideas they have to study transit, we think make a lot of sense. If they want to study consolidation, we think it's a lot wiser path to go down than to talk about arbitrarily combining agencies when you don't know if it's going to, make things a lot worse for current transit customers or current transit employees. And so, there's a lot going on. It's moving quickly, but staff is engaged, and we're fortunate to have Steve and Bo representing us in Sacramento.
Barb?
Thank you, Chris. I just have a question about the AB 2669, tying our hands on our ability to charge for pedestrians and bikes. What's happening with that?
So the author did reach out to us beforehand. The author is helping us get $250 million as part of the budget process. So I just think it's important to be aware of that. Sidewalk tolls theoretically and philosophically sound like something that some people like and a lot of people vehemently opposed to. There's a practical reality about how much money you would make net your expenses if you were to impose a sidewalk toll. And so we think our efforts are better spent supporting the author's efforts to get us $250 million for our seismic retrofit project. If hopefully that's not too crass.
That's a long
obvious.
answer. I get asked about it often. Every time we come out with a toll increase, people are stopping me on the street saying, well, why don't you just charge the bicycles and the pedestrians?
It's generally human nature for people to suggest charging someone other than themselves.
I was thinking about you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Holly? Director's here.
Yes, I had a quick question. You mentioned that the deficit projections might go higher as of May 15th, possibly. If they do go higher, is any of our funding at risk? I know they froze one-time payments, mainly that are environmental.
Yeah,
But I'm wondering if any of our funding for transportation will be at risk.
most transportation funds are special funds, so they're outside the general fund, so they're fairly safe. As far as there is greenhouse gas auction revenue that goes to transit and transportation. There's possibility they could direct that to other programs that are consistent with the intent of that could reduce some funds for us. The other area that I don't think they'll go into is, there's what they call the cycle 6 of TIRCIP, which is the competitive program, which has some general, has some, cap and trade stuff in it. But the prior round of the TIRCIP competitive funds used general fund money to boost up that allocation. So what they could do is use the money that was going to go out this year and use it to supplant prior awards in order to claw back those general fund dollars, which would mean less money for those TIRCIP grants going forward. I mean, that's something the LAO has pointed out to the legislature that could consider. I don't think they'll do it, but there's that possibility. So there are these little areas where they could be impacted, but right now I think we are okay, mainly because it's all special funds or formula funds.
Any other questions? I don't want to jump around too much, but I did want to make one comment on SB 1031 because it is such a hot topic, and I feel like they took two very complicated issues, which is consolidation on one side, and then the fiscal cliffs that we're all facing on another side, and they just it got really interesting really quick. I mean, on the sitting at some other tables like Rabbit does said like the labor and the construction unions, we all can find. We're all trying to. There's tables out with SEIU and all the folks that are facing these huge transit cliffs, and we also need the infrastructure and the investment. So I really think that on the revenue side, there's going to be kind of compromise there, and a lot of it ties into ACA 1-2, which is if we don't get the constitutional amendment passed, going from 55% or down to 55%. We've all seen polls where none of this is going to fly, and we all want to save transit across the bay because we all rely on each other, and we're all committed to do that. But when they put the consolidation on top of that, I mean, how many bargaining units? 19 here.
27, 28.
We have 20 at this bridge.
Oh, Bridge Prosperity, yeah.
We have 20.
bargaining
So we have 7 transit agencies. We alone have that many bargaining units. Multiply over 27 agents, and it gets very, very complicated, very, very quick. And there's a lot of power dynamics between different agencies and folks. And I think it just dies. That part dies of its own weight, just on that alone. So by putting that consolidation in, it really, I think, kind of distracted a lot of energy from where we really need to focus, which is saving the entire system and finding the money to, not only for the operations side, but for future capital and maintenance. And so there's a lot of conversations happening around this, but it's been a really interesting few weeks.
And that's also one of the key things of negotiations, try to find that balance between what goes to operations, what goes to capital, and that's going to be a key part of the discussions going forward. And what type of capital, and that's going to be the more controversial parts. It is. There's a lot of these pieces there. Not only 27 transit agencies, you probably have 27 different retirement plans.
Any more comments or questions?
Yeah, just a comment relative to the sidewalk taxes and fees and relative. I think it would be more advisable to do that once in institute carbon fees for everybody. That's probably the better solution.
Thank you. Should we go? Do we have any questions from the public?
We have no speakers in the room or on the line that would like to speak, so no one in the room.
Okay, so I guess that concludes our discussion on the item. Madam Secretary, is there anyone? Nobody from the public? So thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is public comment.
No speakers.
No speakers again. Okay. Well, I guess we've reached the end of the agenda. May I have a motion to adjourn? All right. Hearing no objections, this concludes the meeting of the Governmental Affairs and Information Committee. The time is, what, 9:35? 9:33.
9:33.